Hello, everybody. Welcome to the monthly public policy update from the Precision Metal Forming Association and the National Tooling and Machining Association. My name is Paul Nathanson, and today I am with my colleague Omar Nashashibi from Inside Beltway. Inside Beltway and my firm, the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell, provide the government relations and public affairs and communications for these two associations in Washington, D.C. And we provide this webinar on a monthly basis to members. So why don't we get started? Here you can see what's coming up in June. We have, as always, in Washington, D.C., we have a lot going on. We have been talking a lot, if you've listened to our podcast, about trade and tariff issues, but uh, this webinar gives us an opportunity to delve into some other things going on the regulatory front, in addition to trade and tariffs, which we'll get to, which there's always happenings going on. So with that, Omar, I'm going to turn it over to you and we'll get started.
All right, thanks, Paul. We're going to start up on Capitol Hill. As we typically do, an update we thought we would have given you well, no, we didn't think it was going to happen, and it didn't happen. The Reconciliation 2.0, and notice they're already talking about 3.0 before the second one is finished. What this is, the House Republicans and Senate Republicans weren't able to work with Democrats to get funding for Customs and Border Protection and for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, so for ICE and CBP. So from those two standpoints, they ended up separating the funding out from Department of Homeland Security and putting CBP and ICE into a separate funding mechanism that only Republicans would be moving and negotiating. They did do that. The Senate did pass a budget resolution that would start this process. The Senate, then the House passed the exact same budget resolution on April 29. That officially unlocks reconciliation. So you first have to pass a budget resolution setting up the rules, the instructions, and what you're trying to do for how much money. Then you go into actually passing the reconciliation. So it's a two-step process. They've gotten past step one and they got stuck on step two when the president started putting out other priorities that weren't related to ICE and CBP that lawmakers couldn't deal with. Among those, obviously, include the $1 billion for the White House ballroom and additional security spending that has been an area of some concern among a few Republicans. And then most recently, the $1.8 billion, as the White House calls it, anti-weaponization fund. Many in both Republicans and Democrats are calling it something very different from that. And they're going to look at putting some strings on that. In addition, a court just an hour or two ago announced they were putting a freeze on the usage for those stated purposes that the White House had intended. So unrelated issues have tied up Reconciliation 2.0. This did not generally have many policy issues on which we were lobbying, and so we'll kind of give it a little bit of passing here in the way we discuss it. It's more of a procedural hurdle for us to get to things that we need to be working on. Those procedures here include this coming week. The Senate will possibly will take. They should have done it last Thursday. They canceled votes, sent everybody home. And so the Reconciliation 2.0 bill will get started this coming week on votes in the U.S. Senate. It'll take at least 2.5 days or so, likely, for the amendments to work their way through. Democrats are going to obviously do a number on a few of these that are out there. So that's going to be much of where we are on Reconciliation 2.0. But what's left in the session before we get to the November 3rd election, the House only has 40 legislative business days scheduled left as of right now. What we are seeing is that we already have the Speaker of the House is holding meetings on Reconciliation 3.0. That would be the vehicle that might include some other tax provisions, potentially some trade, although my meeting last week indicated House Republicans are not in the mood to be voting on trade-related issues prior to this election, given the divisive nature and the cost of living argument and affordability that's permeating throughout the election cycle right now. For you defense folks, we do have a National Defense Authorization Act moving on schedule that authorizes the Pentagon to spend money. The markup for that, a markup is when a committee makes changes to a bill. and is the way that they approve legislation to clear it for the next stage in the process. So almost all bills will go through a markup. The defense policy bill is going through theirs in the House on June the 4th. Senate's going to mark over several days. The House does a marathon. They literally go till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and they just bring in, take out, and go all through the night. The Senate goes over a couple of days from the subcommittees until they conclude the ninth and the eighth and ninth subcommittees and move on from there. In addition, we do have the appropriations bills that are continuing to go through the markup process. We did get a good markup number for the manufacturing extension partnership programs. They marked it to the existing threshold. It wasn't an increase, but in this environment, holding the numbers steady after the president's proposed cuts is significant there as well. And the House committee passed a transportation bill, which they do every 5 years. So there's a lot on the plate to move forward, Paul.
Omar, we have our podcast where we delve into the politics more, but I think it is worth mentioning that on the Senate side, given the losses in the primaries by Senators Cassidy and Cornyn, the loyalty to the administration on close votes is not going to be there. There's a slim Republican majority, and they're going to feel a little bit more freedom to vote how they feel. So that also will create another challenge for the Republican leadership in the Senate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Especially the senator from North Carolina, Tom Tillis, who's retiring, is really had it with the administration in a number of places. So I'm with you. I think it's going to be a rockier time than maybe the administration expected when they started going after folks in their own party in the primaries.
Definitely.
All right. Bringing us over to the administration, good segue there. A couple of things on the regulatory side to flag, more on the positive. One, to put together some examples of more money that is being made available, and something that we'd worked on. A few of you looking at a couple of your names here that's listed. We've been working on this since 2015, since Obama was around, to allow for short-term Pell Grants that would be as little as 8 weeks instead of having to go through the 15 plus and going through thousands of hours. Now we've been able to change the law, and this was included in one big beautiful bill, or as now the administration's calling it, the Working Families Tax Cuts Act. Sounds a little bit better than OB3, I guess. What we were able to do in that, and this is a bipartisan provision included in a very partisan bill, it allows for workforce Pell Grants. These are created and they're for short term, 8 to 15 weeks for training programs. These are going to be industry recognized credentials. The governors and the states are the ones that approve the programs that are there. The program length, again, it allows for now as little as 8 weeks rather, and 150 clock hours. Why that is significant, in many conversations we've had over the past decade, it was very clear that for students, anybody that's got a teenager, trying to explain to them, you have to work for 600 hours or you've got to work for several thousand hours, that is a deterrent for the youth to often get into in a career pathway. And we saw that as a barrier to entry. Now, it's not intended to take you all the way through to the top of your peak of what you need on training, but these Pell Grants are the primary mechanism by which the federal government provides funding directly to individuals that meet certain wage thresholds and income thresholds to help them advance and with training. So we were able to now cut the timeline here to increase the opportunities for individuals to go in there. The funds can be used for tuitions and for other fees that are going towards it. They can then bring that credential rather over to the employer afterwards that will correspond with wage increases and additional and new skills. So wanted to flag that out. The final rule has come forward. The schools that want to participate and other institutions, they can start and getting in there on July the 1st, and the individuals can start looking in and enrolling through the FAFSA, through the federal online portal, starting on July the 20th, I believe is the date there. So that's a significant, many years going back to the Obama years. Working on this it takes a while, but this will help a lot of individuals. We've been in the community colleges, especially with the NTMA, on some tours in the past where this specifically has come up in places like Utah and elsewhere over the years. Over the Department of Labor, sticking there, overtime rule withdrawn, just more of a technicality here. There was a pending lawsuit that was out there that deals with the overtime threshold increase that the Biden administration proposed when they were around. They wanted to take the overtime exemption threshold from 35,568 annually to 58,656 and allow it to increase index to inflation. I think actually it was over a review period, it wasn't just index to inflation, every 3 years that the agency on its own would issue an update, and that was part of the reasons it was found illegal. It would do so without having a public comment period. What's also significant to translate this for you, if you're earning under 35,568 and you've already addressed the duties test and you're in the executive administrative professional, the EAP class, if you're earning below the 35,568, you're eligible for time and a half. Again, this is for salaried employees, executive administrative professional employees. The rule would have taken it to 58,656. That has been rescinded. So you will remain at the 35,568, which is what Trump took it to back in 17, 18, maybe 19. But Trump took it up there after an Obama rule, maybe even earlier than that. And then also keep in mind your HCEs, your highly compensated employees, are at 107,000. We like to put this up there. Usually it'll come out once a year. It just does usually around this time of year in May. So just the latest, why we put this here, not just so you can see the latest stats from OSHA, but if you're going to have a knock on that door, or if you're going to be anticipating or want to prevent an OSHA inspection, these are the top 10 issues that are out there. When we look at a number within our industry, there's quite a few in here. We can just work our way backwards. Machine guarding, self-explanatory. That's on here. The PPE, using those appropriately. Powered industrial trucks has been a huge focus across the last couple, this and the previous administration, and addressing injuries there. The scaffolding, ladders, and fall protection we've addressed on a previous webinar with some of the new requirements that were somewhat delayed by the Trump administration but are still lingering out there. Lockout tagout, we've met with OSHA on this a few times. We do still anticipate an updated lockout tagout, at least possible proposed rule under this administration, maybe as soon as this year. And then, of course, on HAZCOM, that deals with a lot of labeling and violations related to chemical storage and handling that's out there. So just be aware that these are the top 10, which means OSHA inspectors know to look out for that as well. This might impact a handful of you. If you are dealing with a construction project that involves permitting, then there's a proposal that might benefit you to change the definition of beginning actual construction and separating out some of those higher emitting stationary and non-emitting components from the overall permitting process to allow for some of those wiring, piping, and other structures to be moving forward without having to wait on some of the permitting. So to expedite is one of the efforts that's being done there. Proposed rule, not a final rule as well. And then going to something we were just speaking about offline ahead of this as well. Usually, and we're political science majors, if we can't pronounce it, we're going to send it around to you all. But just know that under the TSCA, which is the Toxic Substance Control Act, Toxic Substance Control Act under EPA, they are looking at review of additional chemicals that are on here. And for some of those reportings and those deadlines have now been extended for another year to 2027. You can see a few of them on here that we do know that some of our members use. So just a heads up on some of those 16 chemical substances with some of those studies that have been done on it has been delayed for another year on that as well. Back to the positive side, a couple of funding opportunities here. One from the Small Business Administration. There's a lot of things happening at SBA. We're going in there, I think on the 13th. So in a couple of weeks, we've got a meeting with SBA, with their manufacturing and trade office, to get a better sense of where they're trying. Well, we know where they're trying to take it. They're really trying to change what the Small Business Administration does in terms of their approach to manufacturing, get them more engaged. There's a new $50 million grant. It's only going to be for 10 eligible applicants, but looking at their Empower to Grow under the Manufacturing in America initiative that they've created, that deals with, again, helping businesses understand how to create some growth opportunities and looking at the capacity to deal with training and technical assistance to small businesses. So this is going to be directed not at companies, but more at industry and nonprofits. But again, shows you the amount of cash that the administration rather is putting behind it. as well. We also saw the SBA a couple of weeks ago now announce that they're going to allow for eligible borrowers to combine their 7A and 504 loans for up to $10 million in SBA-backed financing. This follows another announcement on the manufacturing access to credit loans, the makers loans that we mentioned a few months ago, that can be stacked in addition to these as well. So the SBA is trying to make itself even more accessible in terms of funding opportunities for small businesses. For my few Michiganders that we're looking at on registration here, please take note that we have an upcoming Michigan supply night. Sorry, the date got clipped off. This is coming up, I think it's June 13th. So it's in a couple of weeks on it. Encourage you to click on the link below. The Small Business Administration is working on this in coordination with General Motors. But as you can see, they're going much deeper than beyond just GM and automotive. It's a lot broader to try to help industry and suppliers do one-on-one matchmaking at the 2026 Michigan Supplier Matchmaking Expo. So that's going to be in Southeast Michigan, something for some of you maybe take a look at. Feel free to take a look at the link down there, register, attend. Hopefully it can bring something back. And if you do go, we'd love your feedback, positive or negative, given that we're going to be with SBA later this month as well, next month as well. Finally, on this, for a few of you that are involved in grants and are sitting on boards that receive some of this, and it might also affect, it will affect job training funds and maybe even MEPs and other activities that are out there. The government is proposing in a 400-page draft regulation released yesterday, and might have been published today, is going to centralize Office of Management and Budget Control over federal funding and federal grants, including training, and it's going to mandate that political appointees at agencies sign off on all awards for anything that comes under the presidential priority, which is pretty broad, and it was described in an executive order that's out there. This is a very brief 45-day comment period. I expect lawsuits on this, but this, if you are in the grants business, it's likely going to slow grants down, possibly expedite, but they're moving over these agencies to be, instead of looking at peer reviews by expert panels, they're going to now go just to political discretion. So for some of you, especially if you might be in inner cities, some of those areas on job trainings for underserved populations, expect potential some challenges and some hiccups there as well. All right. Into trade, we're going to split up the trade into two different components here. And Paul, as soon as I see you unmute, please jump in. We're going to start on the legal side of things with the IEEPA and the 122 tariffs before we jump into some of the updates on the 232s and what's coming next on the Section 301s. On the IEEPA tariffs, to help level set, these are the ones that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled were illegal. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. The Supreme Court on February 20th said the president exceeded his authority and he can't use IEEPA to impose those tariffs that range from 10% up to 550% on every single country in the world. Supreme Court said you have to refund those dollars. It's $166 billion total that needs to be refunded with interest. The government has set up a portal that will allow for phase one, which is going to cover $127 billion. That's currently going right now. What you're seeing in front of you is the number of entries. That an entry means the number of imports that have been processed or under the IEEPA tariffs over the last year plus by the 330,000 importers of record. So they've got about $35 billion being dispatched to importers. So money is starting to go out the door already. There's been a few hiccups along the ways. They have overstated by maybe just about $10 billion some of the funds. So they're going through some of the glitches in the system. They have not made much progress. We went through the court filing just a few minutes ago from May 11 to May 22nd, and they did not move the numbers all that much in what was processed and pushed out. And so where we are right now, Paul, as you can see here, this phase one, they're moving money out, but there's still a ways to go on it.
Yeah, I think those who submitted for phase one, I mean, at least some folks I talked to, they got their money and interest, and I think those were the easy ones. And now it's going to be a lot more complex, and they're getting pressure from the Court of International Trade. Also, we're getting into now that probably a lot of folks on this call, the situation that they're facing is that their supplier has charged them a surcharge or passed on the tariff costs to them, and now it's a matter of collecting between your supplier and yourself, which does not involve the government. We're going to start to see that. I know for some smaller companies that we're getting dinged by companies like UPS and FedEx that they've gotten letters saying that there's a mechanism where they're going to refund some money. So it gets really complex from this point on.
Good timing, Paul. Whether you saw the questioner or not, nice segue. The question came in. I'll read it out loud, but we do have an answer for you. Have you heard of any companies receiving IEEPA refunds from FedEx or DHL if they were the importers of record? Both companies state that the customer doesn't need to do anything, that refunds will automatically be sent to the customers once received from CBP. Again, Paul, not providing any legal or broker advice. However, the answer, at least, Paul, what your shop hearing, I'm hearing yes. You do not have to do anything. I've heard from one of the lobbyists for one of those two. They are processing, and my understanding is they will contact you. They do not want a million customers contacting them. They have a process set up.
Yes, and I've heard from some companies that are in communication with them where they're getting the mass email and contact from the companies. But I agree with you, and I think they're trying to stay ahead of it, and that they have a system worked out. At least for the company that I talked to, she felt pretty comfortable where the process is right now.
Yeah, and this lobbyist that I spoke with, he said they've submitted literally over 1 million refund requests already into the portal. So they're on it, and doesn't mean the government is. The other is I'm going to click through these. The CBP, Customs and Border Protection, put out an FAQ in the last few days, and so we just wanted to, as I talk over, feel free. Just as if you are in the refund business, this is where you need to be looking at any of the new updates that are going. I did have a client tell me the other day that they received a partial refund. They were owed a bit over 500,000. They got about 20% of it, and without explanation where the other 400 and change is. So they're now in touch with CBP to try to figure that out, as all were submitted all at once for those refunds. So just know that there certainly are some things that they are going through as well. I don't think we put it in here, but under CBP also did put out a how to look out for fraud, key things to look out for. There are going to be a number of entities that we just showed you, $166 billion worth of refunds are going to be applied and requested for, or eligible for being requested. So yes, fraud is going to happen at some point. It's most likely going to be on the end of outside groups coming to you and saying, here, we'll give us a piece. We're happy up front. We'll get you your refund and making certain kinds of claims. So contact us, talk to your lawyer, talk to your broker before you go any further with those kinds of groups. Because what CBP is saying, it's a four-step process. Get in the submission, get in the processing, review your liquidation process, and you get your refunds. The biggest problem, and Paul started alluding to this, is going to be that next steps for phase two, if and when they get to it. Phase two is going to cover the imports under IEEPA that are also subject to an anti-dumping countervailing duty and have also gone through what we call final liquidation, meaning Treasury's already got your cash and you didn't have a way to get it back. So those are some of the other areas that they're looking to hold up and might see some additional delays. Here's some resources for you to take a look at. They've done a pretty decent job of putting some materials out from CBP for government work. We encourage you to take a look at that. The simplest thing that the people still apparently are not doing is getting their ACH info in there, and that's why their money is just waiting for them, and they can't do anything until that comes out there. Have not heard how responsive they've been on technical corrections and technical questions and inquiries. The lawyers are always saying, though, put it in writing anyways, because if you are filing a suit or have some legal action, you've got it in writing that you submitted your inquiry to CBP, and that timestamp is very important if you're getting close to your 80 days prior to final liquidation. It's not 90. Those 10 days are an important buffer. It's 80. If you understand what I meant, then that's important for you to track that. That's there. Pivoting over, and Paul, feel free to jump back in on where we are in this 122 tariff. Again, this is what the president put in place at 12:01 a.m., 1 minute after he took off the IEEPA tariffs that were ruled illegal. These are now at 10%. They have not been increased to a maximum of 15, but they are still at a a 10% rate and apply to everybody across the board. They're being challenged also at the Court of International Trade. The Court of International Trade on May the 7th ruled that they are illegal, that the 122 balance of payment tariffs have exceeded, the president exceeded his authority under that. However, it was a narrow, applied only to the three plaintiffs. They are an importer, I think it's a wine company, a barrel something, and then there's another toy company, and then the third plaintiff is the state of Washington on behalf of either University of Washington or Washington State University, one of the two, that was importing things directly from China. So those are those that have standing under the 122. So even the CIT ruling did not apply to you all. None of you are listed on that as plaintiffs. So even if this CIT ruling was not put on hold by a federal appellate court, then it still wouldn't apply to you anyway. You'd have to get to a broader national injunction, which the court has not agreed to do. So as of right now, there's no change on those 122 tariffs. You're still paying them. They're still being collected. Most speculation in the legal community is that they ultimately will also be ruled illegal, and you'll be right back where you were on those previous slides that we just showed you that deal with refunds and going through that process. Paul?
Yep, I agree with you. Even on an expedited review, we're talking months and months by the Supreme Court. By the time that happens, uh, these 122s will likely be replaced by these 301 tariffs that are now in the process. So, but it's going to be important for obviously for those paying the tariff right now to keep an eye on what's happening on the legal front, because we might have to go through this IEPA refund process again at some point in the future.
Yep, that's exactly right. A few things on the too technical side. If this impacts one of you, I'd love to hear it. We have not found one yet, but there was a very, very narrow technical change that was allowed for Tata Steel in the UK if melt and pour was coming from the Netherlands and then coming into the US. So again, this is very, very narrow, but it shows that in a few cases that a handful or a single company is able to get this one technical change for themselves to go in there. We've also got a couple of other things that deal with it. This is where you can see the actual real language. If this does impact you, feel free to click on it. On Taiwan, this one might impact a few of you. If not competing with them, then maybe someone's in the assembly range. On Taiwan, this implements a January and then a finalized in February, I believe, by all the parties on a memorandum of understanding between Taiwan representatives and representatives of the United States. What this does in simple terms is it gives them the same treatment as South Korea, Japan, and the EU on automotive. It's on automotive parts, rather. It's a 15% all-in cap. That's inclusive of most favored nation duty status, of any general duty rates that are imposed there. So if let's say you've got an MFN general duty rate of 3.6%, and then you've got a Section 232 tariff, no matter what that 232 tariff is, it's going to be limited to the rate of 15%. So it clarifies also that on the aircraft side, there's no 232 tariffs on the civilian aircraft for steel, aluminum, and copper. And similarly on the automotive, it's only a flat 15% rate. This is only on Taiwan and implements the MOUs coming in from a few months ago that's there. I want to spend a minute here on USMCA and where we are. Again, for a refresher for you all, Trump came in and replaced NAFTA with an update called the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. We had a little talk on that on the podcast recently. You can get more details on it. Where we stand as of where we speak right now at 12:30 Eastern, U.S. delegation is in Mexico. They were there meetings yesterday, the 28th, today, the 29th of May. And this first round is to talk about Chinese investments, to address country of origin, rules of origin rather, and regional value content, and deal with a number of issues such as transshipment, and that will be starting today and yesterday. We're on there. We also heard that there's some members from the House Ways and Means Committee that also joined when they get back to town with some of those staff here over the weekend and into early next week. We'll be following up with them as well. The U.S. has identified 52 outstanding demands. Mexico's identified 12. The next round of talks will be held here in town the 16th and 17th of June. That's going to cover leveling the playing field, agriculture, and a handful of other of those demand areas. And then they're going to go back down to Mexico City for a third round the week of July 20th, which is notable given that legally the sides need to note their intention by or around July the 1st. Not too much time here as they go. And most notably on this slide is not so much the timelines and the progress we're making with Mexico, but the lack thereof with Canada, noting that nothing has been scheduled. And things got a little bit worse recently with the streaming tax that the Canadians are putting on the streaming providers, putting into the United States, saying that they need to put more money towards Canadian content. So just note that that is a complicating factor as well. Where we are on the U.S.-China meeting that was held recently, Trump obviously went to Beijing and surrounding areas May 13th through the 15th. The President Xi is going to be coming to town. We're hearing September 24th as the date that's out there. We heard it's coming in the fall, September or October timeframe. Nothing big and groundbreaking, you might say, came out of this. They sold maybe two, they promised to buy 200 Boeing aircraft, much lower, which is why you saw Boeing stock slip a little bit. They did talk about creating a board of trade, but the board of trade would be to allow facilitation and dialogue over goods that are considered less of a priority and not a national security or economic priority risk. And similar with the creation of Board of Investment hasn't received as much attention yet. We still have the current Section 301 reduced rate from 20% down to 10% on some products related to fentanyl. That still remains in effect, and the idea is to keep extending that. We would not expect prior to President Xi coming to the U.S. that Washington is going to significantly increase at least that fentanyl specific 301 tariff, but we do have the other 301s that are pending. The U.S. initiated two separate Section 301 tariffs. So to try to re-simplify things, IEEPAs ruled illegal by the court. Section 122, they're at 10%, being ruled illegal by the courts. The 232s, those are the metals, the autos, those are there anywhere from 15% up to 50%. Courts aren't looking at that. The president is now opening up another front against countries using Section 301 that it's going to use to replace those 122s expiring at the end of July. These 301 investigations, one of them is on forced labor. It covers 60 countries, including the European Union, China, Mexico, Canada, England, and India, and others. The manufacturing excess capacity, on which One Voice commented, that one covers Mexico, also the European Union, Japan, South Korea, China as well, Taiwan, among others. In this manufacturing excess capacity, the government is specifically looking at machine tools and equipment that you all purchase from Germany, Switzerland, Italy, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan. I think they mentioned a couple of other countries, but you get where we're heading with it for the potential to impose tariffs on that production tool, machine tools rather, coming into the U.S. The timeline on this is they held 4 days of hearings, at least on the manufacturing excess capacity, and those final comments just came in last Friday, the 22nd of May. So we could see a report coming out from the Department, U.S. Trade Representative, rather, in the next couple of weeks or so. They don't have a set timeline where they've got to announce the tariffs, but rumors around town are that they are going to make an announcement of what the tariff rates will be on countries, and then they will follow that up with having them implemented once they've gone through potentially a maybe 2 or 3 week public notice period for other countries around the country to come back to them around the world. Wrapping up here, just want to bring Paul back in. We'll talk about some of our numbers as we usually do in the last couple of minutes. Please feel free to type in any questions you've got into the Q&A, and we'll try to answer those in about 4 or 5 more slides. Paul?
Yeah, and I don't have to tell most of the folks on here that U.S. steel prices remain high. We haven't seen a big difference over the last few weeks in the steel. And this is a hot roll, but we haven't seen a big difference in the steel benchmarker report regarding comparing the prices in the U.S. with the EU and China, as everything seems to have been going up. And I'll just add the capacity utilization rate for the domestic steel industry is at 82%, which is about as high as we've seen it in a long, long time. That's also not surprising given the need for steel in this country and the tariffs, the 50% tariffs. So We keep a close eye on this and update this chart every couple of weeks through Steel Benchmarker, but it's a good indicator of what's happening in the global market and U.S. prices compared to the rest of the world.
Right, and within all antitrust legalities and anything else you can do, if you do have any stories that you're comfortable sharing with us that we can just be anonymous and use those between media and also on the Hill related to your metal supply, your lead times, those are always helpful. I literally just had a call an hour ago on A380 and also what's going on there in the context of Midwestern Premium, but also just in scrap with the Chinese buying up all our scrap and driving up the prices of raw materials. We've had some meetings with government folks related to copper scrap specifically, and then this call that we just had an hour ago on that aluminum side as well. Just again with the Chinese because they're shipping containers full of stuff here, and on the way back they're taking our scrap. They're not exactly taking our exports. So that's another area of concern that the government's been looking at. We've had discussions on as well. Some general numbers you all have seen non total hiring where we are in the U.S., more specific to manufacturing. Been a rough few months here in the U.S. Lost 2,000 jobs, but we have seen some revisions. For example, the March numbers were revised back up for a plus 15,000, and February's up plus 1,000. Transportation equipment saw a drop there. Average work week up slightly, 2.1 hours over 40, looking on the better side there as well. But again, some of the latest job numbers that you can take a look. This is one that I tended to like to look at a little bit more than even some of the other ones that are there, where some of the job openings right now, we're still at a fairly healthy tick in March of 2026 at a 300,000 on the durable goods. This is one obviously we're going to want to watch and take a look at and see where we are. And folks are still hiring, although there are still some layoffs in the system that are going on there and where we are on those net changes from previous months and some of the most recent. Trade balance of trade, we're seeing things that in some ways get a little bit less bad in some months, but then some of the spike back. A lot of what we're hearing is going on right now is people rushing, doing this another round again, where they're rushing to get imports in ahead of potential increased tariffs. Now that they've seen the Supreme Court drop it, you're at 10% tariff rate on most countries. Many around believe that we're going to start seeing a spike in tariff rates potentially as early as January or July the 3rd, and if not later than July. Although one lobbyist, she was trying to tell me, not trying, she did tell me she was expecting later and maybe not even right in July. I'm of the belief you will see the 301 tariff at least announcement probably in the next few weeks, if not in the next 45 days. Again, maybe in the July 3rd to the end of the month type of range, and that will change some of the numbers. That's why we're seeing a rush of imports to come in on the water, getting in ahead of potentially some additional July triggers that are coming in there. As you can see, we thought this would show some value of where the China is in terms of getting the export value across the supply chain, and they're just increasing, grabbing larger and larger value-added chain is their clear priority. As you can see here, going from the gold number is 2010, and looking at the jump in here from low tech and then also medium tech manufacturing of the market share that they're trying to take over from the rest of the world, and unfortunately succeeding. Lastly here, please type in any questions that you've got. Mexican imports are absolutely climbing. We're talking to USTR. We've got a meeting Thursday the 4th, and then another one following up with them on another issue as well. The USMCA, of course, top of mind, as we just mentioned, but you can see the number of total exports coming out of Mexico has hit a record of $72 billion there, some levels that we just have not seen, driven by a number of factors, we believe, including China operating in Mexico. With that, Paul mentioned the podcast that we recently recorded. We've got another one, I think we're recording on Tuesday as well. So stay tuned for the latest as we get closer into and now past the primary seasons. We're going to have even more on the political side to discuss, leaving this mostly for on the policy areas. With that, again, please type in any questions. We're happy to expand on anything that we covered in here and answer any questions that you all might have. Okay. Seeing none come in, we will have our next webinar is going to be on Friday, June the 26th at noon Eastern. All that registered for this should have received also invites for that one as well. And then in July, we will be going on July the 31st, also at noon Eastern. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to speaking to you next month on June the 26th, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.